Yoosung felt like his heart was going to burst. Normally he wouldn't be so nervous with playing video games. They were his food at this point, and he was so attuned to playing them that they became part of his daily life. Hell, he could probably live out his entire life with only video games to get him going. However, he had promised his mum that he was going to try to be healthier. Though with the warmth of his object of affection right beside him, he was pretty sure he wasn't going to last long with the state his heart was in. The blonde tried to focus on the wide screen and blaring speakers set up in front of him, but the way you nearly leaned against him, brushing his shoulder ever so slightly with your own, was enough to make him chant all the prayers he knew under his breath. He told you he was doing a chant of victory, part of the game and all that.
Yeah, right,
he thought, taking a deep breath from all the praying he had subtly done, letting your high-pitched squeak bring him back to his senses.
Damn, that was a close one,
he heard himself say, subtly taking a glance at you beside him. Yoosung had invited you to his home to play a co-op campaign of LOLOL, seeing as the other RFA members had turned down his offers.
Stupid,
he thought to himself. What made him think his heart was ready for this? He plastered on a wide smile as you shot him with one of your own. He hurriedly turned his attention to the bright screen, hoping the heated blush on his pale face wasn't obvious. Yoosung was pretty sure you were fully aware of your feelings for him, which terrified him as he had never felt this way about anyone. What if he looked stupid in your eyes? He was certainly the most naive one in RFA. He accepted that. But what if that was a huge turn-off for you? You were practically the definition of perfection in his eyes, even if you reminded him over and over that you were far from it. All of your flaws, your insecurities, your everything. You were absolutely divine, and he was anything but. Okay, I take back what I said earlier. LOL is absolutely addicting, and I too would waste hours of my short life to grind and level my character, you commented, eyes never straying from the screen that the game was being played on. He hummed in response, pleased that his first love actually enjoyed the hobbies he took part in. Most people would just say that LOL was overrated and a waste of time, but you were the first to break that cycle.
Those are hours I can never get back, but it's worth it,
he joked along, letting his character execute an aggressive action towards their rival players. He watched your character follow it up with a defensive action to block the enemy's counterattack, inciting a bellowed,
"Yes!"
from the both of you.
Hey, I want to try something out. Cover for me, Yoosung?
You suddenly said, pushing your character to sprint forward. Yoosung just watched in shock for a moment before following pursuit with his own character, blasting any enemies that got close to his partner. He heard the quick bashing of your fingers on your controller, and he watched your character launch a killer combo move on the final wave of enemies behind the barricade. Before Yoosung could do anything else, the screen faded into black, and both players could feel their breaths hitch in their throats. Suddenly, the word "winner" was plastered across the screen, with both of your characters doing celebratory dance moves beside each other.
All right!
You shouted, pulling a grinning Yoosung in for a spontaneous hug. Yoosung felt his body respond, wrapping his arms tightly around you, while his heart pounded quickly in his chest.
Honestly,
he thought,
if I die like this, then I die a happy man.
However, his joyous state was put to a stop as your tight embrace ended by you pulling away. The two of you locked eyes, and Yoosung actually started to sweat anxiously. The air was definitely thick with some sort of tension. The blonde debated with himself, wondering if this was the right time to pour out his feelings for you. It seems so much easier in movies.
I love you.
He thought.
For the first time in my life, I might just have fallen for someone. I have never tried to be a better person, but because of you, I want to change.
But that was all in his head, and in the end he was just a coward to his core. So he decided against it. He decided it was better to get swallowed up in his unsaid feelings forever than to scare you off with the intensity of his feelings for you. Because a lifetime as merely your friend would hurt him less than even a day without you.
Yoosung? I love you.
The said man was pulled out from his own thoughts and ended up too shocked to respond. Did he? Did he hear you right? You loved him? He felt your hand on his start to quiver and loosen, and for a brief moment he saw your eyes water. So instead of responding to your abrupt confession, he decided to do it how the movies went. He pulled on your arm, bringing you closer to him. He watched your head tilt up towards him in surprise, and he closed his eyes, because damn it, this is too much for his heart, and hoped that he didn't miss the one shot. The soft warmth of your lips that pressed against his own told him that he definitely did not miss it.
This,
he thought,
was simultaneously the best and the worst way to answer that confession.
However, the wrapping of your arms around his neck and the harder press of your lips against his told him that this response in action was worth more than a response in words. Still, it didn't feel right for him to not reassure you verbally. His lips gently moved away from yours, and he placed his forehead onto yours. With a quiet mumble, he said the 3 words he had been practicing in front of his mirror since the day he saw you.
I love you.
Zen took a deep and nervous breath. The albino had to admit, this may be the first time he had ever felt nervous about a performance. He usually felt calm on stage with the gazes of his adoring crowd focused solely on him. There was nothing quite like being able to control the emotions of the people by merely your words and your actions. Theater acting was acting in its purest form, and he was a canvas ready to be gifted with that art. The stage was his home, his zone, and he felt absolutely unstoppable on it. But remembering just what he was about to do was enough to make him dread every second on it. It wasn't the crowd that bothered him. Hell, he definitely wanted a wider audience with what he was about to perform. It wasn't the fact that the entire RFA was seated in the front row, eagerly waiting for his performance. It wasn't even the fact that you, he had fallen for, was with them, just as eager to see him work his magic. It was the fact that for the first time in his life he was going to be emotionally vulnerable in public. He was an actor, yes, and he had done numerous roles with him acting emotional to make the crowd empathize with his character, but that was just it. Those were merely fictional characters, and what he was about to show were his own true feelings. Feelings he'd usually push away until he was alone in the dead of night with nothing but his feelings. Zen spent his time breaking down barriers as much as he did putting ones up for himself. He knew he flirted and teased people a lot, but the moment someone tried to see past that, and not a lot of people did, really, and actually got to know him, he was both overjoyed and absolutely terrified. He has scars from his past that he didn't like flashing around, and a deep sense of self-doubt that people merely saw him for his looks. and you were the first one who was there for him in the dead of the night, the first one he allowed to ever get this close to him. You've done so much more for him than that, and while he said Yoosung was the closest thing he had to a best friend, you secretly got that title, and more in his heart. So after the whole situation with Echo Girl and Unknown, he was glad they could at least try to live normally together. Though it had occurred to him that while you knew about his feelings, he never told you the way he wanted to. Publicly, with his friends and his fans watching him admit it. So there he was, decked in his signature white suit with his fingers nervously poised above the keys of the grand piano in front of him. The only thing he could do as well as act was sing, and as much as he would have loved to reenact the Romeo and Juliet confession for you, he knew a reenactment of a tragic love story was definitely not what he wanted for his own real-life confession.
Thank you all for coming, everyone.
He finally let himself say into the microphone, smiling at the audience. He heard someone let out a shh, ushering the entire room into silence.
My beautiful traveler, I hope you like this song.
He slowly let his fingers down onto the piano. He closed his eyes, imagining the inner workings of the piano striking each note that he played. He took deep breaths, careful to hit each note at the right time. The soft-sung lyrics of "Every little thing she does is magic" rose into the air, and Zen hoped it was sweet enough to make you melt in your seat. He heard a few people in the crowd hum and murmur the lyrics as well, giving him the kick of confidence he needed to finally open his eyes and look at his beloved.
Every little thing they do is magic. Everything they do just turns me on.
He crooned, sending you a quick wink before continuing.
Even though my life before was tragic, now I know my love for them goes on.
He let his fingers fly over the keys, finally getting into the spirit of this entire elaborate confession. He continued singing, each second making him more confident than he was before. As the last notes drifted and faded into the air, he stood up and was greeted by a loudly sobbing Saeyoung. He blinked in surprise and watched as the red-headed hacker practically pushed you onto the stage as he cried loudly, "Damn it, Zen! Just kiss each other already!" The albino took one good look at his friend's tear-stained face before bursting out laughing. He forgot about how ridiculous Saeyoung was when it came to relationships. Of course, with Saeyoung leading them all, it didn't take long for Yoosung to push the crowd to chant with him. "Kiss them! Kiss them! Kiss them!" Yoosung screamed in mock angriness, and the rest of the crowd followed his example. Zen couldn't hold back his chuckle at how his entire confession had escalated. Honestly, he just wanted a grand, and planned to a T, romantic serenade confession for you, but he got this instead. Not that he was complaining, really. It was a good excuse to kiss you, but that would come after his actual confession. Turning to you, he reached for one of your hands and slowly began interlacing your fingers with his. He cleared his throat into the mic, signaling Yoosung to stop his chanting for a moment.
Traveler, my sweet, I meant each word I sang to you. I want nothing more than to stay by your side, loving you for the rest of my life. I love you,
Zen said, tripping over the last few words. He was shaking, but he felt you squeeze his hand tightly, giving him a sense of comfort. You nodded, whispering the 3 words soft enough so only he heard it. The moment was absolutely intimate and personal, and he felt the microphone fall out of his grasp as you finished. Before he knew it, he pulled you towards him for a deep kiss, and he heard the crowd explode into a mix of girlish screams and loud sobbing. He could really care less, though. After all, he was feeling absolutely magical with your lips pressed against his, and that honestly was all that mattered to him. Jaehee let out a tired sigh. The thought that you were incredibly dense had never occurred to her, but at this point, that would be the best thing to describe you. The one she adored was hopelessly and completely dense about her intentions, even though Jaehee was pretty sure she had made her romantic intent very clear. After all, you didn't just ask someone to be your partner and open up a cafe with them. It took years for those couples in movies to actually be ready to commit to something of that scale. Jaehee was so sure you had understood that she wanted a relationship with you when she asked you back during the RFA party. But ever since then, you've done nothing remotely romantic other than make coffee for each other in the morning. You didn't even hold hands, and it was driving Jaehee crazy. Although she wasn't really one to talk, as she only realized her own feelings during the party itself. It had been a long time since the former secretary had ever felt this way about someone, and it's the first time she'd ever fallen this hard for anyone. She never would have expected it in the beginning, but now that you've spent more time together in real life, she knew she was in pretty deep. She thought she could get by with just being friends with you. But your unconditional support for the things Jaehee had only dreamed of having made her life feel like bliss. She was absolutely happy with you, and she was determined to show it. So here she was, scattering rose petals across the cafe and towards the table she had set up for the both of you. It had been a month since you both opened the cafe, and while you wanted to invite the entire RFA to a celebratory party, Jaehee made it clear that she wanted to have your own solo celebration. Just the two of you. Jaehee took a glance at the wall clock hung up in your cafe, and she mentally cursed herself for dragging this preparation far too long. You were going to arrive any minute now, and she didn't even have time to get dressed. Tossing another petal onto the floor, she practically tore through the rest of the roses in a frantic. Her shaking feet led her up to the second floor, where the two of you were staying together, and she quickly got dressed into her recently bought white lace dress and tied her now long hair into a loose side bun. Jaehee did her basic night makeup routine. She didn't want to overdo the whole celebration thing. She knew you would prefer the whole natural look, and while she wanted to stay true to that, she did want to impress you with just a bit more touches to her eyes. Jaehee felt her heart leap at that thought. You, as her partner. Hopefully after this night it would be official. The clacking of her matching white heels echoed as she made her way back down to the cafe. She let go of a sigh of both relief and worry, wondering just where her partner was. Jaehee pulled out her phone, quickly punching in your numbers, when a light tapping interrupted her. She looked up, expecting yet another customer to shoo away, but was instead greeted with a breathtaking sight. There you were, dressed to the damn tens, making Jaehee's breath hitch in her throat. She nearly dropped her phone as you shot her a smile through the glass door of your cafe. Jaehee immediately walked over to the entrance, fumbling slightly with the locks before finally opening the door to greet you. You walked in, taking in the sight of rose petals littered all over the floor as Jaehee closed the door shut. Before Jaehee could open her mouth to compliment you, you immediately produced a bouquet that you had been hiding behind your back.
Happy anniversary, Jaehee,
you said, smiling widely at her. Jaehee's shaking hands reached out for the bouquet, and she felt this warmth just wrap around her. She closed her eyes, letting her guard down and just feeling the presence of your arms around her. Before she could register your words, they tumbled out of her mouth, slowly yet with just enough certainty to make it real.
I love you, traveler.
Jaehee felt the other stiffen in her embrace, and the sentence that she had said finally registered in your mind. She felt her chest tighten, both in fear and in shame, and she knew that this is the first time she'd ever messed things up with her feelings. She attempted to blurt out an apology, an explanation, anything to fix this, but words did not come out. Jaehee's eyes began to water, but before the tears fell out, she felt the embrace tighten around her. Her neck tingled at the feeling of your breath as you let out a sigh against it. You pulled away and cupped Jaehee's face perfectly with your soft hands. Your lips were trembling, Jaehee noted, and she watched your face grow closer. She expected you to kiss her, square on the lips, but you placed a soft kiss on her forehead instead, sending warm feelings to the pit of her stomach.
I was so afraid that you didn't feel the same,
you whispered with a small smile.
I had taught myself not to hope, but I'm glad I did. I love you too, Jaehee. Thank you.
Jaehee immediately wrapped her slender arms around your neck and brought her now lover in for a proper first kiss. Your anniversary dinner could definitely wait. Jumin wanted to just stop and give in. Of course, being a perfectionist, he wasn't going to do that, but God, did he want to. He looked down at his bandaged fingertips, sighing as he turned his attention at the searing hot pan in front of him. This was the 11th time he attempted to cook something even remotely resembling a taco. He probably shouldn't have started cooking without consulting Jaehee. God, he had never cooked in his life. What made him think he could do this? This was all for you. Jumin chided himself with a sigh. He had to admit, you made it look easier than it actually was. Getting the tortilla at just the right warmth and softness was the first problem he had tackled, and it took him an hour to get the pan at the proper temperature for heating soft tortillas. Now he was stuck with getting the actual filling right, and to taste. He flicked through his phone, searching for the best way to season the filling. He wouldn't want you having an upset stomach because of his cooking. The mere thought of you being in such a shape made his chest tighten. Any other person, and he'd probably just ask his personal chef to prepare whatever they wanted. But this was you he was smitten for, and he wanted to make sure he did things based on his own skill and not just his money. Jumin stared at the countertop, racking his brain and trying to recall how you had prepared the delectable dish you had made a little over a week ago. The very dish that pushed him to get off his leather office chair to do something nice for you. He got the correct ingredients, that much he was sure of, but there was something off with the way his filling tasted. The man took a deep sigh, rubbing the bandaged fingers he had injured while he was getting the stove to work. He never would have guessed that a week later he'd be trying to make the very same tortilla dish as a profession of his love. As he mixed in a dash of pepper, he heard the light tapping of shoes on his marbled floor. Shaken, he moved to cover as much of his preparations as possible. Before he could place the lid on the pan, you ended up striding into the kitchen, hips swaying a little bit more than usual, he noted, though that was probably part of his imagination. Recently, he'd been getting more impure impulses than usual, and he knew damn well that it was because of you.
Jumin? Are you actually cooking?
You said, and he heard the teasing tone in your voice. He would usually be tense around people, but the soft smile that graced your lips as he looked over at you allowed him to relax. With a nod, he responded.
First time in my life, to be exact. I do not usually bother with cooking, as I am constantly busy with work.
He took his tasting spoon, placed a few bits of meat and salsa onto it and raised it to his lips, checking for the taste. His eyes widened in surprise, and he couldn't help but smile at the taste. It was perfect. It had nearly the same taste as the tacos you had done for him back then. The light skidding of a chair across the marbled floor told him that you had taken a seat across from him. "Oh, there must be some sort of occasion, since there's no way you'd be cooking otherwise," you said. Jumin turned around to greet you with a wide smile, a plate of freshly cooked tacos in hand. He watched you raise your eyebrows, but the slight quivering of your lips told him you were trying hard not to laugh.
No occasion, really.
He cut himself off, placing the plate in front of you with a smile. The man took a seat in front of you and with slightly shaking hands said,
I just wanted to surprise you. Last week, you, made these tortilla dishes. It was quite an experience for me. Eating commoner food and bonding with a person. With you.
Jumin watched your delicate fingers pick up one of the soft-shell tacos to bring it closer to your mouth. He watched your eyes widen as you chewed thoughtfully.
I am well aware that it might not be as good as your dish, but I wanted to do something for you that would be utilizing my own skill,
he said slowly.
Because, my dearest, that day when you made these tacos, I had realized something important.
Jumin's eyes looked up to meet yours, and the image of your wide eyes and your mouth full of his cooking reminded him that you were absolutely breathtaking. With shaking hands and a shaking voice, the normally calm CEO felt his feelings swell from up his chest as he tried to find coherent words to match their intensity. He never really was one with words, but he wanted to try to be romantic at least. For you.
Traveler, I love you. Truly, and with all of my heart. You are the most beautiful person I have ever met, and if you will do me the honor of accepting my heart, I believe that I can die a happy man.
Jumin had expected you to say something in response, but instead he heard your choking on your taco. His hands trembled as he quickly reached out to help you, but his hand met yours in midair. You gave him a wide smile, clearing your throat and signaling him that you were okay. Still frantic, he handed you the glass of water he had placed on the table a while ago. He watched you drink the liquid, and he cursed himself for ever thinking this confession was a good idea. He had nearly killed you. You didn't, Jumin. I was fine. I'm just a little shocked, you said, chuckling at his outburst. He felt himself blush, realizing he was venting out loud. That being said, you paused to take his hand into yours, and he felt himself shiver as you pressed kisses onto each bandaged finger. Thank you, Jumin. For a first-timer, your cooking was amazing, and you should know that meeting you was the best thing that has happened to me. I love you as well, Jumin Han. More than words can express. Jumin watched your face grow closer, and his lips were greeted with the warmth of your own. He closed his eyes, leaning into you and tasting the hint of pepper and salsa on your lips. Your first kiss was chaste, soft, and slow. But the both of you knew that this was enough to get each of you breathless. He felt you pull back, interlacing your fingers with his. He watched your lips curve into a goofy smile, and that was absolutely fine, because he was sure he had one plastered all over his face too. With all the money and material things he had, This might just be the first time Jumin Han had ever felt genuine happiness. Saeyoung felt like launching himself into the sun. He had a stabilo-drawn moustache across his face, and the light-hearted laughter coming from you in front of him definitely made his mouth twitch into a goofy smile. Your eyebrows were shaded thicker with the same stabilo marker used on him, and he couldn't help but admire the look on you. Even with caveman eyebrows, you still managed to make his heart skip a beat, which sounded absolutely cheesy in his head, but it was the truth. It took him a while to accept his feelings for the newest RFA member. He had given up on the notion of love a long time ago. He had believed the whole meeting another, falling in love, and settling down business was nothing more than a pipe dream after joining up to become an agent. He had pushed away any sort of chance at a romantic relationship, believing that finding happiness with a significant other was something he would only have in another life. Of course, he should have known it wasn't going to be that easy. Nothing in his life ever was. Even back during his childhood, he had to grit his teeth through his problems. Meeting the RFA was the first taste of actual happiness he had in his life, and although he felt guilty for putting up a facade with them, he knew it was the right thing to do. The other members brushed him off as a hyperactive weirdo, which suited him just fine, as long as he could keep them safe. And then you showed up, and you sent everything in his life spinning out of control. You immediately caught onto his act, but instead of being turned off by it, you joined him. You spoke to him as if you knew what he was talking about, and he was pretty sure you didn't. But he couldn't help but be amused at your attempts on getting onto his good side. You spoke to him as if it were normal for someone to use binary code in casual group conversations. You had your own quirks in talking to him, and all too quickly. It felt like you've made a language for yourselves. You had your own inside jokes, and Saeyoung couldn't help but feel this intimacy from the bond you've nurtured. It's the first time he'd ever let anyone get this close to cracking his wall, and it terrified him to think that he could be putting you in danger just by sending stupid emojis. His life didn't allow him to have any personal relationships. It was too dangerous for anyone to get involved with him. Despite it all, he found that he had no regrets getting close to you, knowing you and actually falling for you. Dare he say, it was the best rule he's ever broken. It wasn't easy for him, the whole accepting he was in love thing. He tried to push you away countless times, tried reminding you that he was a completely flawed person and that he had merely lied about who he really was. Saeyoung believed that should have been enough to push you away, but you refused to listen to him. You were as hard-headed as he was, and that really threw him into a loop. He was used to being left alone and leaving people alone in return. He did what he thought was best, even if it meant possibly alienating the relationships he had. He figured that time would eventually heal any wounds he or the other party might have. It did hurt, though. The first time he tried pushing you away, it felt absolutely wrong, which was probably the universe telling him to man up and face his feelings. So there the both of you were, playing truth or dare like a bunch of drunk high schoolers. He wasn't quite sure how you ended up sprawled across his apartment floor, with packs of honey butter chips and PhD peppers strewn around the both of you. But he could really care less when you were just in front of him. The both of you each have done a couple of dares by now, neither wanting to spill each other's secrets, but Saeyoung was adamant on confessing his feelings tonight.
Ah, fucking hell, traveler. It's called truth or dare. You're supposed to throw in the truth once in a while.
Huh, he said, faking an annoyed sigh. There wasn't anything you could do to annoy him, really, but the least you could do was build up to his grand confession. You stood up and smiled at him cheekily, before toying with his speakers to blast out another silly chart-topping dance song. He heard you stifle a chuckle before turning to look at him with a wide smile.
No matter what you say, I'm still picking Dare.
You said, grabbing his wrist to pull him up to your level.
And I dare myself to dance with you.
Pushing himself up to take you into his arms. The close proximity of your bodies made the back of his neck start to sweat. The both of you ended up doing a weird mix of slow dancing and hand flailing that was only achievable when both partners couldn't dance, and yet he found himself enjoying the feeling of your body against his.
Truth or dare, oh God 7?
You said cheekily. He scrunched his eyebrows together. It was now or never, he thought. Truth. He watched your face turn into a surprised expression before quickly turning into an impish look.
Oh ho, that's a surprise. You must have something to confess.
I love you, stupid, he said without thinking. He felt the air grew heavy between the both of you, and he looked down to see your wide eyes looking up at him. He swallowed, berating himself for the horrible timing. Oh God, this is it. This is how he dies, a lonely single man. He braced himself for the incoming rejection, but instead, he felt you jump up to hug him tightly. Hell, you practically launched yourself towards him, which ended with you being held up by his scrawny arms. Your weight shifted, and it was too much for Saeyoung to hold up, so he ended up slipping and toppling over you. He had you pinned down, and he swore his face was flushed as red as his hair. You looked up at him with eyes squinted upwards in laughter, your hair messily framing your face, making you look like you'd just gone out of bed. His face turned a shade darker as he realized just what he'd have to do to see you like that once more. Before he could move to get off of you, he felt your soft skin against his neck. He pulled towards you, roughly and desperately. The feeling of your lips on his was absolutely electric, and the absolute desire that he felt between the both of you made the hair on his arms stand. He'd been deprived of actual romantic touch that he was absolutely in need for more of you. Still, he decided there was more time for that later in the night. Saeyoung pulled away gently, leaving both of you heaving and blushing heavily. Your lustful eyes were looking up at him, but he scrambled off of you before he decided against it. He sat properly, and he pulled you off his apartment floor. He couldn't help but smile at you as he brought your hands to his face. He placed it onto his cheek, and he felt you cup his cheek into your palm.
I love you, traveler. Took me the longest time to accept it, but here I am now. I promise I'll do my best to make you happy.
He leaned into your touch, and he felt his eyes water at the sight of your soft smile. God, how'd he'd ever get so lucky with you? He took a deep breath, trying to control the rush of emotions that swelled up inside him.
I know I've made you, cry before. I'm sorry for pushing you away. I just couldn't risk losing you. You know? It sounds stupid now, but I don't know what I would have done if Saeyoung hurt you.
It's alright, Saeyoung. It's done. Besides... You paused, sticking your tongue out. If Saeyoung hadn't let me break into Rika's apartment, we never would have met. So, I guess it all worked out in the end, didn't it? He laughed at this, nodding his head in agreement.
Of course it did. You had the defender of justice by your side after all.
You shook your head, slapping his face lightly. His hands reached up to his cheek, mimicking the best betrayed expression he could muster.
Ow!
I love you too, Saeyoung. Thank you for keeping me by your side. Meeting you might have been the best thing that's ever happened in my life. You said, looking into his eyes to show him that you meant it. He knew just how much pain he must have made you feel before he came to terms with his feelings. Silently, he brought your hand in for a gentle kiss.
And you're the best thing that's ever happened in mine. Thank you for this chance, traveler. I'll bring you to that space station one day.
He watched your face lit up in pure joy, and he thought the stars in your eyes were worth more than those a million miles above them. He silently thanked his God for finally giving him something to call his. Jihyun was absolutely terrified. Ever since Rika left him, he always thought he had become half the man he was with her. He never had much self-confidence in his work from the start, and he was convinced that he didn't really have the talent for the area. So when a pretty blonde girl told him how much she enjoyed his work, it didn't take long for him to fall for her. Rika pushed him to become who he was today, and he would always be thankful for that. Even if their relationship had become destructive, he convinced himself that it was real at some point. He knew it was real at some point. He wouldn't be this devoted to her otherwise. After their messy breakup, he believed he would never again find love. Those ridiculous breakup posts that Jumin and he used to ignore were now beginning to make sense to him. It was hard. The whole rediscover who you were before process. He needed to get away from it all, and taking a trip to do photography seemed like the best thing to do. Of course, he had considered telling the RFA, but he wasn't the type to pour out his feelings and burden others with them. No, all he needed was the feel of his camera in his hand, and it certainly was peaceful at first. Naturally, life had to catch up to him at some point, and when Jumin updated him on the newest RFA member, he didn't think much about it. At least until he managed to chat with you for a brief moment on one of his late-night checkups on the group chat. It didn't take long for him to realize why the others were so enthusiastic about your presence. You had a way of connecting with others that he hadn't seen since Rika. Perhaps it was your words, how easily you managed to get used to Saeyoung's quirks, and how quick you were to comfort and guide Yoosung. Perhaps it was a way your voice sounded, calm, reassuring, yet commanding. Jihyun thought he might be able to sleep peacefully for the first time in months when he listened to your voice. Perhaps it was how unabashedly honest you were with the rest of the members, something Jihyun could only dream of doing given the multitude of secrets he kept. For the first time in a long time, Kim Ji-young considered the very real possibility that he might be falling in love all over again. It scared him to think of his feelings. It wasn't that he was afraid to accept that he loved you. He knew he couldn't run away from that. No, it was because he was terrified of the future he'd be giving you. Sure, he'd be getting ahead of himself with all this fantasizing, but he couldn't help but be frustrated at the situation he'd been put in. The V you knew wasn't who he really was, and if you got involved with the Mint Eye, he'll never forgive himself for bringing you into his mess. So, Jihyun figured he could steal you away from that mess for a moment, take you someplace nice, and maybe, just maybe, sort out his feelings in the process. It wasn't anything special, really, just a quiet night out to his latest photography exhibit. It was the least he could do for you. Well, for the both of you really, seeing as how you were both content with each other's company.
This was from your trip, right?
You asked, pointing at the third print in his collection. He squinted, trying to make out the details of the picture through hazy eyes. He gave you a warm smile as he nodded.
Yeah, it was. I was lucky enough not to scare the robin away from the window. Her colors really make the pictures stand out.
You hummed in agreement, squeezing his hand for a brief moment before releasing it.
You've got a real talent, V. These pictures? I can only capture these moments in my dreams,
you said in amazement. He let out a soft laugh, shaking his head.
Well, you're able to see these moments in 20/20 vision. You're one step closer to making your dreams come true.
He joked, pointing at the frames placed atop his nose. You hit him lightly and scoffed.
That's the thing. Your disabilities don't hinder you from making art, from breathing life into pictures. That's talent. Pure talent.
And a lot of practice, traveler,
he added, pointing to one of his prints.
I didn't get to this point without practicing taking shots.
You nodded at him, wholeheartedly agreeing. Just like that, the both of you fell back into your comfortable pace. Jihyun certainly didn't expect to be joking about his vision with you so quickly, but the both of you have grown close enough to know that it was all good-natured. Besides, you certainly made your conversations fun.
That's what I admire about you, V,
you said, so matter-of-factly, just as he moved on to another showcase. His mind didn't register what you said at first, but when it sunk in, he immediately stopped in his tracks. He turned to you, seeing you smile widely, and he guessed he must have had a surprised look on his face, as you quickly added,
I mean, you just keep on pushing yourself despite it all. I know you must be incredibly busy helping the RFA too, so it's amazing how you still have time for the things you love.
Jihyun nodded all too quickly, causing his frames to fall off his nose. He felt his cheeks heat in embarrassment. Of course you didn't mean admire in a romantic sense, he berated himself internally. It was stupidly hopeful of him to follow that train of thought. God, he could just bang his head on the nearest pillar. He shook his head, focusing on your extended hand, which held the fallen sunglasses. His turquoise eyes met yours briefly, and he was suddenly enraptured by their color. It had been a while since he'd seen anything without the lens of his sunglasses to obscure them. He found himself wondering, for a moment, just how he had fallen for Rika when someone like you existed. Instead of taking his sunglasses and resuming the tour, he decided that this would be the perfect time for him to confess. He took a deep breath, feeling his impulsivity get a hold of him. With shaking hands, Jihyun reached out to you, wanting to feel your skin against his palms. His heart felt like it was going to explode out of his chest as he felt the softness of your skin. He watched your surprised expression closely, trying his best to memorize your face, something he may never see again given his condition. He closed his eyes, wanting to savor the feeling. He was terrified of losing you, truly, but that didn't mean he wasn't going to protect you with all that he had. Rika will never hurt you the way she hurt him. He won't allow it.
Traveler, I'm sorry,
he started, trying to silence the hammering in his chest and the ringing of his ears.
I can't hold it back anymore. I need to tell you how happy you make me. I know I have fallen for you.
He found himself releasing a sigh, feeling relief from the confession. He knew he was taking such a huge risk admitting his feelings for you, but he had enough secrets to last him a lifetime. and he certainly didn't want to keep you in the dark forever. You deserved to know how much he thought and worried about you. He felt you tremble against his palms, and fearing the worst, he opened his eyes to see you beginning to cry. Your arms had fallen to your sides, and you still clutched his shades. He immediately panicked, and instead of wiping them away, he brought you into a tight hug.
But what about Rika?
He heard you mumble against his shirt. He shook his head and said,
Rika and I broke up. Remember, I think it's time for me to move on. Besides,
he said, pulling you away so he could look into your eyes. He knew words couldn't convey all that he was feeling, but he hoped it was enough.
She can barely hold a candle against you. You make me feel complete, Traveler. It feels like I'm whole again when I'm with you.
He finally finished. For a moment, all you could do was stare, and then his blazer was pulled roughly, and his lips met yours for a kiss. He heard cheering explode around the both of you, but all that registered was the feel of your lips against his. He hoped the feeling burned into his memory, because this might just be the best kiss, the best moment in his life.